The British elite are currently stranded in a minefield of troublesome historical milestones. 25 years have passed since the Hillsborough disaster, 30 since the brutal government crackdown on the Yorkshire miners' strike, 100 since the needless slaughter of World War I. And historical injustices like these carry with them a wealth of ill feeling directed at the status quo, then and now. Subsequently, history threatens to tar public perception of our incumbent government. In order to justify its continued thirst for theft and warmongering then, Britain's establishment suddenly finds itself forced into a period of reinvention.
This is the story of one unlikely character, and how despite being over 100 years old, he continues to threaten this ideological whitewashing, even now. This is the true story of the Little Tramp. In 2014, the global elite are plagued by continued economic and political crisis of their own making. Their way of thinking and living is coming under ever-intensifying scrutiny, and their governments are struggling to reimagine the horrors of history to excuse the crimes of the present. Of particular significance currently is World War I.
Since the mass mobilisation of Stop the War in 2003 against the invasion of Iraq, public sentiment has remained steadfastly opposed to further bloodshed. Subsequently, the UK military's international infamy, often mistaken for influence, has waned significantly. In the wake of the government's failure to persuade the public to accompany America in another bombing campaign against Syria last year, and with the West seemingly eyeing up conflict with Putin's Russia over exclusive rights to exploiting the Ukrainian economy, the reimagining of World War I has suddenly become a key strategic battlefield for our nation's elite. From culturally illiterate Education Minister Michael Gove's humourless panning of comedy classic Blackadder Goes Forth to the banal BuzzFeed-esque 10-point summary of the war by BBC historian Dan Snow, there has been a concerted effort to reinvent the horrors of World War I's mechanised conflict as not only necessary, but actually a bit of a lark.
Caught recently in the crossfire of this ideological conflict, having characteristically stumbled into a tricky situation not of his making, is Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp, who reached his own historical landmark in February. The beloved character who first appeared on screens in February 1914 is no stranger to this historical process himself, of course. The tramp, once revered by the poor and reviled by the rich as a figure of rebellion, has become so shrouded in historical mystification that he can be warmly remembered by the very people he was once a statement against.
Even the Daily Mail, who backed the Nazis around the time of Chaplin's anti-fascist classic The Great Dictator, now fondly remember the tramp's antics, in an ideological shift akin to royalists 100 years from now warmly recalling that rascally Frankie Boyle's jokes about the Queen's haunted vagina. Yet, even now, there is something troublesome about the man in the bowler hat, big shoes and baggy trousers. Something that remains unreconciled with dominant accounts of history, which disturbs the rich and powerful. This is where Chaplin's legacy enters the war debate. In a recent article in The Guardian, it was implied Chaplin somewhat cynically moulded his tramp character in a bid to re-engage with the British public, having become unpopular for failing to enlist in the war effort. The problem with this theory can be seen even now, in a time when the homeless are being dealt with all the subtlety of A Clockwork Orange, through relocation and persecution. Tramps in general, then as now, were hardly thought of by wealthy Hollywood as the lovable underdog that would get an angry mob on side. The homeless and unemployed were a stain on their world vision, showing the true cost of the economic system they profited from. Tramps were therefore traditionally depicted as villains, snatching purses, drinking and fighting. This caricature of the dangerous poor was a reflection of ideological fears of the wealthy elites who came to dominate the film industry as they had the rest of society. Chaplin's choice of the tramp was rather like choosing a member of the Benefit Street cast as a likeable protagonist now then, unthinkable to anyone inside the elite. Of course, when we speak of the tramp as a character, it is worth clarifying that he was not always homeless or even unemployed. The tramp was a set of traits and characteristics that Chaplin transplanted into numerous situations, and whilst these incarnations weren't exclusively vagrants, they always remained society's underdogs.
This is where, unlike the Guardian article, we must visit Chaplin's roots and the harsh childhood that undoubtedly led him to sympathise with the systemic victims of capitalism, even as he rose to become one of Hollywood's richest stars.
In Charlie's early life, a time before the safety nets of the welfare state or the NHS, the workhouse was still a regular destination for thousands of unemployed, sick or elderly people as a system of poor relief. Inmates would labour long hours in overcrowded conditions, often for no pay, in order to keep a roof over their heads. Charlie and his brother Sidney were sent to London workhouses on several occasions, whilst their destitute mother spent time in and out of asylums, and their absent father drank himself to death. Yet despite such desolate origins, Charlie and his brother managed to carve out opportunity on stage, and at the age of 19, Charlie was signed by the Fred Karno Company, which took him to America, a step that eventually led to his making a fortune. Now, at a time when our own government is trying to re-legitimise forced labour programmes like workfare as an alternative to starvation, papers like the Mail are attempting to reconcile Chaplin with the idea that enough hard work can graft anyone out of poverty. Indeed, his background means he theoretically epitomises the American dream, embodying the plucky rags-to-riches individual that capitalism is said to be made for. But as we can see from the evolution of the tramp character, it is the legacy of his origins that make him so terrifying to the status quo even now. In the early days of Hollywood, a popular narrative trope, personified by Harold Lloyd or Buster Keaton's comedies, was for a bumbling yet determined individual to somehow rise to the top through his own gumption. The Little Tramp's films were different. Success is more or less limited to finding happiness through other people, whilst this rarely results in bettering the character's material circumstance. This recurring theme is best summarised in the beautiful city lights. The film begins with the tramp upsetting a wealthy gathering by sleeping rough on an undoubtedly pricey statue representing prosperity that they have just unveiled. His presence damages their image of a society that they all profit from, showing the ugly, exploitative side of their existence. And so rather than help him, they chastise him. The penniless tramp later meets a blind flower girl and raises money to pay for her eye surgery. After the surgery, she discovers his true identity when she touches the tramp's hand, having believed him to be a wealthy duke. In that instant, not only do we see her ideological illusions shattering, but we see the meaning behind Chaplin's tramp crystallised. Ordinary people cannot depend on the benevolence of the wealthy and powerful, who are repelled by our very existence, and the idea we can ascend to be them is all too unlikely. If we are to survive, we must help and depend upon one another to overcome our adversity.
And here is where Chaplin's tramp is most dangerous to dominant ideology. It is out of this realisation that potential to challenge systemic injustice is born, where the promises of liberal capitalist ideology don't resemble the nightmare reality they in practice provide us with. And that brings us back to the Great War.
During the First World War, Chaplin made 2 propaganda films in support of the Allied powers' troops, and often used his popularity to boost the war effort. In The Bond, he tried to encourage US citizens to buy Liberty war bonds, whilst in Shoulder Arms, released a month before the war ended, Chaplin's tramp appears as a bumbling recruit. In keeping with wartime propaganda, in Shoulder Arms, Germans are depicted as incompetent, rapacious lunatics with bizarre facial hair. But the tramp, along with a huge number of ordinary people, was about to undergo a major political shift. To explore this further, I spoke to historian and Chaplin fan Neil Faulkner. How did the horrors of the trenches influence and shift public opinion afterwards?
I think there's a huge radical mood which begins in 1917 and is there really into the early 1920s, which is a response to the experience not just of the trenches and the slaughter in the trenches, but also the privation on the home front. In Germany, for example, about 750,000 civilians starved to death. So I think it's true to say that people view the world differently in 1918 and later in the interwar period than they had done in the run-up to 1914. I think there's a very high degree of traditional deference up until 1914 and a sort of assumption that the ruling class, among many people, an assumption that the ruling class in some sense knows what it's doing. I think after 1918 that's gone. There's much more cynicism, much more doubt. People are much more willing to criticise their rulers, and specifically there is a very strong reaction against war. I think Chaplin is an absolutely central cultural figure in the English-speaking world in the first part of the 20th century, and I think the creation of the Little Tramp character in 1914 is actually creating a character who represents the ordinary guy down in the shit at the bottom of the heap, and that's what the audience recognises. The audience empathises with the character and indeed empathises with his mischievousness, with his defiance of authority, with his ridiculing of authority in all kinds of different manifestations. And that fits perfectly with the much more cynical mood which is created by the experience of the First World War, then intensified, of course, by the Depression. And although the Great Depression kicks off in 1929, actually through much of the 1920s, there were high levels of unemployment and poverty, so a high degree of cynicism about the ruling class arising out of the war, but then sustained really by the broken promises of homes fit for heroes and jobs for heroes and so on, which there had been immediately after the end of the war.
So, the horrific reality of the 1418 war and its needless mechanised mass slaughter brought with it a colossal change in public perception. A growing portion of society was coming to see the powerful as the parasites they were, and to demand change from the bottom up. Reflecting this radical shift, come the Second World War, the Little Tramp took a very different stance from before. In his first talkie, The Great Dictator, Chaplin transplants the tramp's persona to a Jewish World War I veteran, now working as a barber in a spoof Nazi Germany. The barber's past demonstrates a shift in Chaplin's and society's perception of enemy soldiers. They are now the victims of their ruler's greed, no more evil than ourselves. And with this change in perception comes a startling conclusion that would even have rocked the Ally leaders. As with modern times, where he bumbles into the middle of a left-wing rally, the tramp barber ends up entangled in a fight for justice more by chance than intent. This time, he is mistaken for the dictator Adenoid Hinkle, also played by Chaplin, and is forced to make a victory speech to vast crowds present and listening on radio.
Having been introduced as the scourge of the Jews and the future ruler of the world, Chaplin's tramp breaks a lifetime of silence to instead speak passionately in what many believe to be one of the most eloquent and compelling calls for international socialism ever made. In it, he calls for an end to dictatorship and states he wants to help everyone, whatever their faith or ethnicity, before emphatically concluding that a better world is possible if we struggle for it together.
This is an anti-fascist film then, not because it issues some red, white and blue call to arms for American and British citizens to join the army, or a film playing on some naive notion of patriotic duty. It is anti-fascist in the sense Chaplin acknowledges the same political, economic and social disparity that led to fascism in Germany and Italy were present worldwide, and could have led to the same result in England or anywhere else. In order to truly fight fascism then, we must fight these systemic inequalities at home and help build a free and equal world in the process.
It is this transition of the tramp, from pro-war propagandist to red flag-waving rebel, that not only terrified the elite of the time — America refused him access to the country as a suspected communist — but also the modern elite, who presently scramble to reinvent Chaplin and the decades of war and poverty that moulded his character. But despite the century-long effort to remove his films from that social context, the character of the tramp still encapsulates Chaplin's political transformation, and through him that of millions scarred by poverty and war, while embodying the potential of future generations to make that same shift.
Recently, a video, reproduced and viewed millions of times, was posted on YouTube, combining the speech from the great dictator with Hans Zimmer's Time from the score of Inception. Not only do the tempo and tone of music and footage fit like a glove, there is a truly precious message in their pairing. By adding a modern score, the clip says simply that this beautiful call for change remains relevant, even after so many years. The true Little Tramp continues to symbolise the power of love over hate, the possibility that even ordinary people who embrace the elite's ideology can come to oppose it through experience, and to embody our potential to change the world for our loved ones, our communities, our fellow human beings. It's a legacy we must fight to protect, for a future we modern tramps can still build.
We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world. Millions of despairing men, women, and children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!